Hello, everybody. I'm Billy Chen, and I am part of a studio, Todd Williams and Billy Chen, who designed the Kappa building. And a lot of the thinking that went into the building had to do with the belief that you have the ability to change the world. And I do believe in that ability to change the world, but part of changing that world is making sure that you go out and vote. Take charge.
Good evening and welcome to all of you in the room and on Zoom. We're delighted to have you here. I am Laura Walker, president of Bennington College. Billy Chen, who is an amazing architect, who designed this building along with her partner Todd Williams, also is now designing the Barack Obama Presidential Library in Chicago and taking some of the ideas she learned here about engagement and public action to her work in Chicago. They've also designed the David Geffen Hall in New York and the Barnes building in Philadelphia. So they say in their remarks about who they are, they say that they approach architecture as a work of profound optimism. It is possible, they say, to make places on the earth that can give a sense of grace to life. And that's what they've done for us here. So welcome to the fourth class of Saving Democracy Together. Today we're exploring a topic that is, I think, very dear to all of our hearts: higher education, civil discourse, and our democracy. We're going to be speaking today with Laurie Patton, who is the president of Middlebury College. Her time at Middlebury has been marked by really an unwavering commitment to the liberal arts and a resolute belief in higher education as a cornerstone of our democracy. She's a visionary leader who believes in the power of conflict transformation, and she will talk about that tonight. On a personal note, I just want to say that I am so grateful for Laurie's support. She was here when I got here 4 years ago. The presidents of the, I think at the time, 11 or 12 Vermont colleges got together to try to figure out how we could get through COVID together. And she was incredibly welcoming and incredibly generous to me and has become a friend and a mentor. And I want to point out that as Laurie prepares to assume the presidency of the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences in January, which is very exciting, we are going to miss her terribly, and I want to extend my thanks to her. Of the 11 college presidents in Vermont, when I arrived 4 years ago, only 2 will remain standing after Laurie leaves Middlebury. This turnover speaks volumes about the challenges facing our institutions and the paramount importance of our mission. We are grateful for the presence tonight of several members of our Board of Trustees, so thank you for joining us. And I want to extend my particular thanks to Ellen Sapphire and Peter for your generous support of this series. So now I am delighted to pass the microphone off to Maurice Hall, who will talk with Laurie Patton. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Laura. Welcome everyone here, and welcome to all of our friends and colleagues on Zoom. Just want to remind you that part of our how we will do things this afternoon is we will have a conversation with our guest. But once we have finished having a conversation for about 10 or so minutes, we'll open it up to questions in the room with some of our students and some of our guests in the room. And then our friends on Zoom, we will open the conversation to you also. We want to encourage you to participate, and we encourage you to be a part of what I expect will be a rich conversation. So I want to say a little bit more about Laurie Patton, who is our guest this evening. She is the 17th president of Middlebury College and the first woman to lead the institution in its 224-year history. Patton is an authority on South Asian history, culture and religion in the public square. She is the author or editor of 10 scholarly books and 3 books of poems, and has translated that classical Sanskrit text, the Bhagavad Gita. Patton joined Middlebury in 2015 after serving as Dean of Duke University's Trinity College of the Arts and Sciences. She earned her BA from Harvard University in 1983 and her PhD from the University of Chicago in 1991. She was president of the American Academy of Religion in 2019 and elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2018 in 2 categories: philosophy and religion, and educational leadership. She has asked, when I asked her how she would like to be addressed, she said, and she has this wonderful tradition on the campus of Middlebury that she will refer to. She has asked to be addressed as President Laurie, so please join me in welcoming President Laurie. And so I am assuming she's going to come on the screen at any moment now to be in the conversation.
Can you guys, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can see you, yes. We can see you and hear you and hope you can hear us clearly.
Very much so.
So welcome, and it is wonderful to have you here. And when we spoke earlier this afternoon, we talked a little bit about a sort of a history and a culture on your campus that led to a really remarkable innovation that really sits well with what we're talking about this evening concerning civil discourse on campuses, and that's the Conflict Transformation Collaborative. Can you tell us at the very beginning of this conversation a little bit about the collaborative, what it is, and what is the story of how it came into being?
Absolutely. And first of all, let me just say thank you and Laura and all the folks who planned this event. I wish I could be with you in person. It seems, I hope the weather is lovely and the trees are turning. I've only been away for about a week, but at this time in autumn, you always, want to have a savor every day. So, and congratulations on a really wonderful event. I'm delighted to see so many different kinds of people at the event. It sounds fantastic. So thanks so much for asking that question about our collaborative. So it begins really with a story that's a hard story to tell. And I think it's really important from an institutional perspective. Sometimes institutions tell stories about themselves which are mostly true and important, but there are pieces that are harder that need to be told differently. And we certainly experienced that in 2017, right after the election, when we had a really tough episode of student unrest and clashes on campus that really broke us open. Around issues of freedom of expression, around issues of inclusivity, around questions that we needed to ask again of democracy and what it meant for us to prepare citizens for democracy. And I think it's important that that happen on every college campus and that you allow it to happen in the best way, meaning we need to go back to basics. So after this episode happened in March of 2017, we appointed a group of, or actually it was a group of faculty, staff, and students who voluntarily came together, who wanted to be in this conversation about what this looked like. And we ended up creating a thing called the Engaged Listening Project, where we realized, and we realized that faculty needed to lead this initiative for a couple of reasons. They are the ones that are the guardians of diversity of viewpoint. They are also the ones that will be and caretake the institution for the longest amount of time. Students are amazing and they shape institutions in incredible ways. Administrators too, and faculty have a kind of depth of leadership in this space. And they realized that they needed to listen to each other and to their students and in their classrooms differently. So the Engaged Listening Project takes faculty out of the classroom, usually one course release. This was funded by Mellon, to learn how to listen differently. And we focused almost exclusively on listening. And what does it mean to listen well rather than just to sit there and be quiet while you've got a balloon over your head knowing what you're about to say, but really be changed by what a person is saying and take the time and pause to understand what the person is saying. And that's hard in academia because people are paid to be positional. And the number one thing that you learn in conflict transformation and conflict negotiation, which is my training in part, is to be is to have positions, but also to pause and to say, actually, I'm going to explore options first. I'm not going to just take a position. I'm going to say, I'm going to pay you $1 for the house. I'll pay you $1 million for the house, and everything in between, and allow the capaciousness of that exploration to happen, and even in the tension of a negotiation. So from that, I also realized that, and this I think you and Laura both alluded to, Middlebury had incredible resources in this area. We had peace builders on the Monterey campus where I am right now. We had people specializing in this on our Middlebury campus. We had folks looking at civics in our community engagement, all of that. And I said, okay, much of leadership is lighting a fire because recognizing that the kindling is already there. So we built on our engaged listening project, which faculty really responded well to. After March of 2017, we had faculty who wouldn't speak to each other because they were so brokenhearted about how they showed up in this space. And then over time, we had a weaving together again of where we needed to be. And as a result of this happens once in a president's lifetime. I had a donor that said, "What's your dream?" And I have always wanted to create conflict transformation as a liberal art. I do believe that it is a liberal art. I believe that everyone needs to learn it and be exposed to it, like writing, like data science now, like quantitative skills. And so I got my institutional staff together, and they wrote a very institutional proposal, and this donor responded, no. I want a letter from the heart. This is way institutional. Again, that's the second thing that only happens once in a lifetime. So I wrote the donor a letter from the heart, and they said, great. And we then began to work with a donor advised fund at a foundation for $25 million to create in all aspects of a Middlebury education conflict transformation as a liberal art, which includes our pipeline in our Breadloaf School of English and our high school work out here in Monterey for high school teachers. It includes all aspects of undergraduate residential life where our RAs and other folks are trained in basics of conflict transformation. It includes an academic cluster, which we just inaugurated last year. It includes graduate study here in Monterey. We have a number of different conflict transformation fellows. It includes our schools abroad, where we have student experiences in learning in other modes of conflict transformation wherever they are. And I can share some examples of that. And the student experience, all our interns, before they go on internships, are trained in conflict transformation. So it's super exciting. We're in our third year of the 7-year grant. I want to say a couple things, and I know I want to be disciplined about the time. The first is, what I want to make sure that everyone understands that this is not like a magic bullet. The campus could explode tomorrow. All it means is that it's hard, and that these skills and education is a long-term investment, and we're going to succeed and we're going to fail in certain ways. And I also want to make sure that I'm not that president that comes at a conference and says, hey, we're doing it right and everyone should. It doesn't work that way. We are incredibly lucky, and we're trying an experiment, and we would love to share how it has worked and where it hasn't worked so well. So I want to just be clear on that. But and also importantly, that conflict transformation, different than, say, conflict negotiation, it's an idea that was put forward by Jean-Paul Lederach in a beautiful little book and many books that he's written. He is an extraordinary thinker and writer and educator. And his idea is that as you learn conflict negotiation skills, going back and forth, listening to the other person, exploring options, thinking about interests and so on, you also need to pay attention to the structural analysis of the problem. And you pay particular focus as you resolve one conflict to the structural issues that have given rise to that conflict, whatever they may be. And you address those as well, so that conflict, which is inevitable, can be made a positive, and the tension, which is inevitable and may never go away, can be directed in a positive rather than a negative direction. So it's realistic, it's pragmatic, and it helps people build communication skills because they know conflict's never going to go away. And that's the definition of conflict transformation that's really important. So we train students in that idea, as well as deliberative dialogue, how many policymakers have adopted that as an approach, with scaffolded conversation, where you simply take one question at a time in conversations between groups. I can share some examples of that. We have training in basic conflict mediation, which is my training initially. We have training in restorative practices as well as restorative justice. So those are the areas that we're focusing on with our students. And I have not made this a mandate. I believe in ubiquity rather than mandate, because if we made it a mandate, everyone would hate it right away. And so I'll stop there, because I know we want to make this more of a conversation, but I wanted to make sure I share those basic points before we talk about all the ins and outs of and the subtler points that I know are also important.
So thank you very much for laying that out so comprehensively. I heard an emphasis on listening. I heard an emphasis on intentionality. And I heard some of the language that some earlier scholars would have referred to as managing conflicts rather than trying to solve them in meaningful ways. Yeah. Have you, as you watched so much of the unrest unfold over campuses over the past few weeks, and to the extent that you feel comfortable, are there lessons that this model has taught you that you felt you were able to apply on your campus, or in the work that you do with other presidents around this issue?
Yeah, so far, and what I'm going to frame it by saying, again, this is what we've learned so far, and I don't want to do any victory laps of any kind, because that's not the spirit of the work. So yes, we had some amazing conversations with students last semester. The first thing that I will say is, like Bennington, small campuses have an incredible advantage in times of unrest, because they have social capital and they have relationships in a way that larger campuses. I just spoke 2 days ago at a UCSD and San Diego on combating anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and I'm just carrying in my heart right now that the challenges of a big campus around not being able to have social capital. Take advantage of that relationship. Students, faculty, staff, trustees that are in the room, I can't see you, but please take advantage of the relationships that you have right now to build peace, because you have an extraordinary resource in the social capital of a small institution. That's number one. So we, by sheer accident, Maurice, we decided we'd go with the Israel-Palestine issue to try an intergroup dialogue using the methods of deliberative dialogue, which, as I mentioned earlier, there are many different aspects of it, but it's a way of just doing one question at a time. So in the spring of 23, we had Palestinian Jewish students, or Arab identifying or Muslim students, and Israel identifying or Jewish students getting together regularly, and not talking about the conflict necessarily, not talking about how to resolve it, not doing any of that, but simply saying one brave thing. That was the entire goal, was one brave thing. And they created relationships that were genuine and authentic, because people understood what the practice meant, and the goal was small. Conversational goal was small. And so when October 7th happened, and everything broke loose, and there were people upset on all sides, and there were demands for statements and all the things that happened to every college campus, we had social capital in those groups. And it made a difference. We had at one point, and you just always have to be open to learning from students in new and important ways, and ways that are really unexpected. And one of them was that we had the Hillel students bake challah, which is the bread for Shabbat, and as a way of supporting Central World Kitchen, which is the only NGO that's working in both Israel and Gaza. And then all the Muslim students bought the challah, and they collaborated in this incredibly wonderful way and donated the proceeds to Central World Kitchen. Did that mean that people weren't mad at each other? Did that mean there was a kumbaya? There was nothing like that. Everything was tense. It was really hard. And yet there was this work together around food that made all the difference and kept us going. We did have protests. In the spring, we had an encampment, and our approach to the encampment was to listen to the students first and foremost, not as in they are right, but simply to be present and to listen. We had 4 administrators who were trained in this approach work with the students. And what we came up with was not a, call and response, here are our demands, here is the response from the admin, but rather, can we create a statement of shared values? And we did. The media didn't understand that that's what we were doing, and that's okay. I'm used to that. But I was so happy that we were able to name a statement of shared values, which then has provided, and the encampment felt that we had moved in a direction that was the right direction, and was able to, they felt like they gotten their point across. So we had a peaceful graduation. We had a really important set of moments where we were able to say to the students whom we had a relationship with, hey, what you said on the Students for Justice in Palestine website about us and the administration's intentions, to your point about intentionality, that kind of hurt. That's not who we are. And so, how do we move forward in that space? So the 4 people who were engaged were my CFO, my Dean of Students, and the Dean of Faculty, and the person who is the head of our equity inclusion, who also has deep experience as a mediator. So I'm super lucky because all of this wisdom came to bear. And I also will say that the tent that they had said something important for all of us, which is keep talking about Palestine. It was a way of saying, yep, we're going to talk, we're going to talk, we're going to talk. It's a model that was earlier when we worked on our environmental program called Energy 2028. That was the same kind of idea, which is we were literally talking about our energy programs and divestment from fossil fuels for 10 years. We made it bigger. We made the context bigger, like shared educational purpose. And I got really impatient after the trustees took up a proposal, which became our platform of Energy 2028. It's good when you don't lose your patience a lot, because when you do, people listen. And I finally said, the trustees are thinking about this. So the only people that are getting in your way are you, and just stop demonstrating, because we got it. You did that. We heard you. We're considering, you should be writing them thank you notes rather than protesting. And the next day, as the trustees considered the proposal that we had on the table, which went through unanimously, it blew my mind, was a large bag of thank you notes from the students to the trustees. It melted the trustees' hearts, and that wasn't the only thing. It was on the substance that we had the deliberation. But it's a kind of radical relationality that we also had again in last spring. We're trying to rebuild that as we have a new group of students in the fall. If you really are committed to radical relationality as a form of educational purpose, you have to rebuild it every year, every day. And that's hard. And one of the big questions before us and challenges before us is this sustainable? It's really hard on our staff. And that's one of the big questions for me as a leader moving forward. I know I've shared a lot there, but I hope I've answered your question in a way that will generate more questions.
Very thoroughly. We're going to come to our students in a moment with a question. I just want to ask you one last question, hopefully with generates a quick response. You've addressed some of this, but what would you say are the limits to this model? Are there intractable issues or intractable conflicts that you found this model can't address?
It's such a great question. Thank you for that. So I have training in religion and conflict, and the number one thing that you learn when you are in a situation of religious conflict is that you can't mediate values. and you can't negotiate values, but you can mediate and negotiate issues. And so what you do in situations where people's values are not commensurable, truly not commensurable, you can actually turn to other things that they can do, that folks can do together to create a modus vivendi for coexistence. And that's a really important pragmatic way of thinking about it. And Ashutosh Varshney, the political scientist, writes about this too. He said, in the case where Indian cities erupted in violence and the cases where they didn't, he studied the cases where they didn't in 1992 during Hindu-Muslim tensions around the destruction of a mosque. And what he found was that people who worked together on other issues like the water board, like the agricultural reformation committee, like the arts committee, whatever it was, when there were leaders from both institutions who worked together on other things, they had the social capital to understand what they couldn't mediate, and they found other ways to be together. And so, yes, there are limits to that, and there's a way of dealing with those limits, which is to expand the pie, as they say in conflict negotiation, and make another way of living together possible. I have lots of examples, which I'll be happy to share later if you'd like. The other thing that I think is important is staff. It's very hard to staff and make sure students are healthy and feeling okay and being listened to, and also observing the boundaries of the rules that we have in place. During an encampment, our staff were exhausted, our students were exhausted. It's hard work, and I don't think it's sustainable in the long term to be in that state forever and ever. And so we're looking a lot at how we can make this culture sustainable in times of deep tension, like what all campuses are experiencing. So that's our big question right now.
Thank you so much. You see me standing up in the room, which means I'm going to be coming to students and others in the room to ask questions. For students who are here, some of our students have prepared questions, and I'm going to ask you to begin by introducing yourself to President Laurie, saying a little bit about what year you are, what you're doing, and who you are. So I'm going to start.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, President Laurie. My name is Hazel, and I am a freshman here at Bennington, and I think I'll be focusing on journalism mixed with environmental science. So at many liberal arts schools, most of the students are politically very left-leaning, and I think this is very much the case at Bennington and maybe to a slightly lesser extent at Middlebury. And I've found in my experience that some of the most valuable conversations that I have had, and the ones that really challenged what I think and why I think it, have been with, for instance, people who are conservative and disagree with me pretty fundamentally on a lot of things. So I'm curious, do you think that these progressive liberal arts schools are in some ways doing these liberal students a disservice by kind of keeping them in a bubble where their opinions go largely unchallenged? And do you think that this can limit their ability to respond when they are met with partisan conflict outside of the college?
Thank you so much for that question, Hazel. And I think you will, in your work in journalism and environmental science, you will find so many different iterations of the question that you asked me. So I think it'll be a great area of focus for you. Yes, I do think that colleges who are left-leaning do their students a disservice if they don't expose them to conservative ideas, period. So the answer is really straightforwardly yes. And I would say a couple of things in relationship to that. I'm going to say something that is hard to name, but feels like it is important to name, which is that right now, you could say that campus unrest is a business, and the purpose of the business is to keep the base inflamed, i.e., one of the things I was proudest of with our students is that they had a lot of pressure from a lot of different national organizations on all sides. And we had to work with them to say, what do you want? what is important to you at Middlebury at this moment. And what we found, and I was so proud that they were able to withstand that national pressure. And I know that's a very dark way of looking at it, but it's a really important pragmatic way of looking at it right now, that our students exist in the public square under immense amount of pressure. And it is so much harder to be a member of the public square with an opinion that is openly expressed than it has ever been before. Obviously, because of social media, because of the internet, because of the way that we consume information. So the number one thing that we need to instill in our graduate students is courage. I think that's one of the most important things for liberal arts and sciences education is courage. And courage to be able to withstand that pressure that's going to come from all sides through social media and the internet, and in addition to in person. So for those reasons, not giving students the tools to work with people with whom they disagree is incredibly important. So if you're a predominantly liberal, left-leaning campus, you need actively to cultivate debates between liberals and conservatives. You need to think about how conservatives are on campuses. If you have conservatives on campus, you need to give them voice. And you need to practice that kind of both listening skill that's super important, and also do the hard work of shared value. And this is where I have a definition of what's called pragmatic pluralism. I believe that the best kind of ideological, any kind of pluralism, but ideological pluralism or political pluralism, is one where you acknowledge that you actually need the other side, and you need the other side to be itself. So, for example, I'm a person who has aligned with center-left causes frequently, but I also really understand and believe in some center-right causes. And I need conservatives to push me to say, okay, well, what about this? And aren't we losing X and Y and Z if we don't have this value, which is understood as a conservative value in particular ways? And it's we have something at Middlebury called the Hamilton Forum, which brings people, liberals and conservatives, together to debate certain questions. We've had student protests and some of the speakers that have come, but that is an incredibly important function of a college campus. That's been a good thing, and I think the more we can foster that, and the more frequently, so it just becomes part of our daily fabric, the better off we'll be. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. We have another student question.
Hi, my name is Nora Dyer Murphy. I am a freshman here at Bennington College. I was wondering, when an administration is not being equitable with their own policies, how can we as students hold them accountable while still being productive and safe?
Oh, that's a great question. And I want to say a couple of things around this question, because there are times when administration folks know that there is an inequity, and other times when they don't. And that's one of the reasons why relationship really matters. So I'm going to give you some pragmatic advice or response, not advice, a pragmatic response as well as a sort of philosophical one. So again, at a small place where we are privileged to be at, because you know these administrators as people, I always ask, when I hear the word administration, I ask that the administration be humanized, because if we have a humanized conversation, then it's going to look and feel differently. So frequently with students, when folks will say the administration, I say, who do you mean? Do you mean that person or this person? I've had people say, we mean the administration, not you. And I say, no, you have to include me. I'm a person, and I'm an administration. I might have made a decision that made it hard for you, and that you completely disagree with, or that didn't feel humanizing to you. And so let's, as humans, talk about that. That's been really annoying, I think, for a lot of students, and because I know they experience me as a person in power, and in many ways I am. And I felt that it also really works to have a kind of conversation that is important to have, where people can genuinely reflect on what is inequitable. And so that would be the first kind of more pragmatic mode that I would say matters. I have a hard time with manuals of activism where the president is the target. And that's literally the way the president is described. That feels really dehumanizing to me in a way that is difficult. And the next thing I think is super important, which is I think there have been 3 or 4 times during the time I've been president at Middlebury where students have held decision makers, what I call academic leaders is the term that I prefer to use, which humanizes folks, accountable in a really important way, because even though we were trying hard, we weren't going fast enough, or we weren't paying attention to a particular thing on campus that we needed to do better on. I'll give an example. We invested a lot in making 4 of our buildings universal access, and that was really important, and it required a lot of time and energy and resources. But we still hadn't gotten it right around students who were disabled either as part of their regular everyday life or temporarily disabled, who didn't have good transportation around our campus. And we thought it was fine, but it wasn't. And we really needed to listen to students say, this has been my daily experience. That's just one example where we were held accountable in a really good way. Most of the time, academic leaders whom you know and maybe trust in other contexts are probably needing to hear what your daily experience is like so that they can make a different kind of decision. And so that would be an example where we were held accountable, 2 or 3 folks who really got together and said, okay, this is what we need to do to address this and fix this in a daily experience life. The third thing I will say to your really great question is, we've also moved away from what I call the call and response, which is you must, I always say conversation first, and that can be frustrating for folks sometimes. But when people say, well, we demand X and you must respond by Y, I mean, we're still going to have that happen because I know students feel passionately about things and in a good way, and they change the world. I can give you about 5 examples where their creativity, students' creativity, has opened my eyes and changed my mind in some incredible ways for the institution. But we've changed to move away from that dynamic as much as we can to what's called equity narratives, which is really stopping and doing the research first about what is inequitable. And then the trustees have a committee, the Equity Inclusion Committee, where they hear those narratives and those data from students in a way that allows us to make better policy. So the frame of the conversation is, let's hear those narratives, let's make better policy together because we trust your experience. And that has really helped us, using a lot of the conflict transformation principles, to come to a common conversation where we're really working together. The example I'll give there is, we just did a big report on equity narratives of our equity and inclusion office over the last 6-7 years. And one of the things that came out as a big issue we needed to work on was transparency. And a couple of the trustees, when they were talking with students in this meeting, said, but we are transparent, we do share stuff. And what it came down to is we were all so tired that we weren't able to make it visible what the office was doing, and ask for help when the Equity Inclusion Office couldn't do it all. And it became really important that the students felt valued in their opinions and their research, and the trustees felt valued because they were, okay, now I get it, that we're not as visible as we need to be in this work. And so that was another helpful outcome that I experienced. So I hope those examples answer your question.
Thank you so much. We have 2 guests here with us this evening who are community college colleagues, and they have questions and I think stories to tell us. Elizabeth McHale, and is it Therese Willett? And Therese, you're a student. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what is your question for President Laurie?
Yes, my name is Therese Willett, and So my background is in healthcare, information management, and currently I'm enrolled as a computer information systems student at CCV. And ultimately, I believe I want to go into nursing, elder care. My background growing up was my mother was a delegate for the Republican Party, and my father was a delegate for the Democratic Party. Okay, so I am accustomed to having an open mind and to listening to all points of view. But in this particular era of our American government and process of democracy, I find it very difficult to engage my fellow students about anything having to do with the upcoming election. So I really need some guidance into how to approach them and listen better and build rapport with them. I think that's an essential foundation of democratic action.
Thank you so much, Therese. First of all, what an incredible background that you have. And what a gift, as well as it must have been so complex and so hard sometimes to have two leaders, in politics, and yet you learn these skills, which is incredible. So thank you for your story. So I'm going to share some initial thoughts. And I think, this is for a much longer conversation, but because I work in interreligious dialogue, I taught a course on community change and interreligious dialogue here in Monterey. And I had a lot of community activists who were working in this space. And I had someone who was doing a Christian-Muslim dialogue in a small rural town in California because there was an influx of Syrians, refugees into a small rural town. And he said, I'm starting my Christian-Muslim dialogue, and they're fine, but they don't really know how to approach each other, and they're perfectly polite. But I don't, he shared the kind of sense that they were feeling a lot like what you described just now. Like, how do I approach? What do I do in this context? And I said, so you've already started and the topic is religion and it's God and thinking about salvation and the differences in Christian and Muslim ideas and so on. He said, yeah. I said, okay, what do the Syrians do? And he said, they're farmers. And I said, do they have particular skills? And he said, yeah, they've got these amazing skills around irrigation. I said, okay, make your next 5 meetings about irrigation between Christians and Muslims, not at all about God, not at all about, different ideas of salvation. And because you will develop trust that way, there will be openings to discuss difference in a way that allows for the trust to remain. And that would be the frame that I would give to you, particularly around political difference, which my view right now is that political difference is almost in our country, because of our level of polarization, like religious difference. It's almost like an absolute value that people hold. And so to embrace it head on when you have your fellow students and you're building community with your fellow students sometimes is a difficult thing to do in community, and will probably, at least today in the midst of election and so forth, be really hard to maintain. Whereas if you take on the really important task of working with folks who you disagree with politically on something else entirely and creating that social bond, my guess is that there will be openings for another, a conversation about things that feel like deeper fundamental disagreements. And even then, the fact is that your expectations need to be super low. Like, maybe the only thing you can do is share an experience. My husband and I have a cabin in the North Georgia mountains, and we have some very, very conservative Trump supporter friends. And we are not those folk. And one of my closest friends is that person. And she discovered one day that, and we just walk our dogs and talk about reading because she's a reading specialist. And we love talking about reading. And she shared with me one day that her grandson, who was in the Navy, was gay. And she said, I don't talk about this with anyone else. I can't, but I want to talk about it with you. And because we had that profound bond around reading and that we loved reading, we were able to approach that topic in a way that we didn't in other contexts. So that would be, again, this is a much more complex issue than what I'm saying just now, but that would be the way I would start and go from there.
Elizabeth, I know you are also here. Did you want to add anything or add any commentary?
Well, I am just devouring what I'm hearing. It's so rich. It's as faculty at a community college, I want to know how. I mean, I had different questions prepared about the state of democracy and what it looks like now, and how to talk about that with students. But I'm now much more focused on how to bring conflict transformation to the community college environment, from what I'm hearing from you.
Oh, thank you. Elizabeth, may I ask what you teach?
English and mythology.
Oh, wow. Okay. My background is my PhD's in mythology as well, so we should have lunch. That would be awesome. There's so many things to respond to. I think, first of all, I want to introduce you very concretely to Emily Bartels, our Breadloaf School of English, which is focused on English teachers in high schools, but there are college teachers or social workers, whatever, has a conflict transformation component to it now. And it's all about using conflict transformation skills to read literature or the lens of conflict transformation to read literature, and to read literature as a map for leadership. Not only the most important piece of literature, as someone whose training is in partly literature, that we enjoy it and we find aesthetic models, but Ursula Le Guin said it beautifully when she said that I write fantasy because I want to find other ways of being morally in the world. And the way that I can do that is through the arts, when you practice stuff. Art students at Middlebury taught me that in a major way at the end of 2017 when they created a 24-hour arts festival. And I know Bennington is super strong and a model for the nation in this area. And that 24-hour arts festival allowed them to be in the public square in a way that they were anxious and nervous about being in other contexts. So I think the arts and literature, and I'll connect you with Emily Bartels, is an incredible space for teaching conflict transformation, not because we reduce literature to a social science, not because we instrumentalize the gorgeous aesthetic experience of being in literature, but rather because there are, just as we learn about the sun, just as we learn about the world of nature or what Thoreau thought about it, or just as we learn about these things, I think we can learn about how people both resolve and don't resolve conflicts in literature, and how there are models for leadership there. So I would be happy. That's the entire focus of our Breadloaf School of English track in conflict transformation. Our political science department's going to do something else, et cetera. But we'll get you up to Breadloaf, and I'm sure you have a ton to share with other folks in the community college environment about how this could work in your context. And it would be great to have you come and share your ideas and thoughts and experiences as well. So that would be a basic one. And I think the other important thing that I want to say, one is that a lot of folks have responded, yeah, if I had $25 million, I could do, stuff like that too. And I completely get that. Our job and our task from our funder is to create opportunities and ways of being so that other folks can take it up in their particular way, rather than saying, hey, here's our model, everyone use it, which isn't going to work. But rather, how do we create opportunities for others to translate and interpret what this looks like, conflict transformation as a liberal art, on their campuses in their way? Because what you're going to share with the world, Elizabeth, is going to be needed and different than what Middlebury has done. And the third thing I'll say is, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, Maurice, but conflict transformation is a way of making democracy concrete. Even if it's finding a way to help with your roommate, even if it's that, a lot of students come into higher ed or even high school or wherever they are, not feeling that democracy is an abstraction, but why should it matter to me? And it's an incredibly important question. And so what we feel that conflict transformation skills do is make the possibility of being in the public square less fearful, because they have the tools to manage difference in a way that they didn't before, even if they're just one or two tools. And secondly, even the smallest conflict successfully managed is a way of preparing for democracy. And so that's an important piece of our overall view that I think should be mentioned.
Thank you. I just want our friends on Zoom to know we're coming to you soon. We're going to take one more student question, and then we'll come to you on Zoom.
Hello, President Laurie. Thank you again for taking the time to be here. My name is Lucas. I use they, them pronouns. I'm yet another freshman here at Bennington, and I'm here to study education and linguistics.
Awesome.
My question is, at a time when many schools are under a watchful and often critical eye of their students, what is the role of an institution in facilitating community discussions or dialogues that could very well include criticisms of the institution? How can a school ensure that all involved feel safe and heard without overstepping and encroaching on free speech?
It's so important. Lucas, you're doing education and linguistics, and I can tell from your question that, you know, you're really interested in how speech is managed and in the best sense and thought about, you know, in the broader educational environment. So I will say a couple of things. The number one job of a college administrator these days, or an academic leader, is to understand that critique is going to come their way, criticism is going to come their way every hour of every day, right? And that we need to translate sometimes in our head, especially when it comes a lot and you do screw up or you don't do it right, to say, yep, that's it. And so join me, to be invitational about the criticism and say, join me in helping, let's make it better. And that's, I think, a frame that I have tried to do as much as I can on the Middlebury campus to, you know, varying degrees of success. So, for instance, anyone who comes to my office hours has to read Trabian Shorter's and Krista Tippett's interview with Trabian Shorters, who is a wonderful guy who thinks about asset-based framing, and begins by saying, if we begin only with critique and then end with critique, we're missing a whole level of the strength of the person that we're trying to help, whatever that is. So the Jewish tradition talks about it as going from strength to strength. Trabian Shorters talks about asset-based framing as a cognitive skill to magnify humanity. So, for example, the school to prison pipeline for Black men, he himself is a Black man who grew up in Milwaukee. He said, that's great. That's a really incisive critique, but it didn't get at another way of thinking about it, which is think of the brilliance that we are losing in this country and the experience and the creativity because of that experience of Black men, which is a whole different way of framing it. So I ask anyone who talks to me, back to your thing about speech and conversations, to try to work with an asset-based approach. They don't have to. It's just a matter of, hey, let's read this article together and talk about what it would look like if we tried it this way. And then it helps people be solution-based. And so I think critique and criticism should be part of every conversation all the time. And administrators and academic leaders should be open to that. Learn how to engage with it, and that folks in the community, students and faculty and staff, should also have a way of naming the criticism so that it invites leaders into solving it with them. And that's an incredibly hard thing to do, but I can say from my own experience that it really works, because then even though the conversation's hard, it becomes more participatory. And sometimes the accusations and the feeling of accusation, which help shut people down, or the feeling which we hear from students that they're not listened to, that and then they shut down, is less, because you're showing every minute that you're willing to stay in the conversation. I was super proud of when we created our Energy 2028 initiative, that we had students and trustees literally in the same room for 10 years. There were sometimes different students, sometimes different trustees, but they never left the table, and they were so mad at each other, and they never thought they could agree, and they just kept meeting until we got to this really transformative divestment, as well as fully powered by renewable fuels by 2028 in our core campus modality. And we did that by expanding our view of each other. There's a lot more to share in that, Lucas, but that's a start.
Great. So we do have a question from our online audience. And the question is, President Laurie, I'd love to hear some examples of center-right positions that we should be listening to. They do seem to get lost in the noise coming from the right.
Oh, that's such an important statement. And I think the center-left positions get lost in sometimes the noise that comes from the far left. And all of the actors that I have had to deal with are good faith actors, and that's the hard piece of it. And so I would say a couple of things. I raise a lot of money on behalf of Middlebury with folks who are center right. So an example would be the foundational value of freedom of expression. That is something that the right and the left actually share at different moments. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And the way that I think about that tension between freedom of expression and inclusivity is to say, let's change the frame. It's not a tension. One is a right and the other is a responsibility. And so how do we find a way to reinscribe that right of freedom of expression over and over and over again in a way that acknowledges what the center right has been saying in that space, and allows that freedom of expression to work on behalf of including more and more and more people in the American story. So that would be one example. Another example is the role of the moral life and reflection on the moral life. We know from a number of different studies by political scientists and psychologists that personal morality matters. It matters to folks on the left as well. But the center right in particular really is concerned about personal morality. So when I fundraise from folks who are concerned about these questions, I begin by talking about education as character formation. And what does that look like, and how do we think about it? I believe that deeply. And I think a lot of folks on the left would also believe that deeply. So those would be two examples where I found, and also where I need people on the center right to really remind me of the primacy of those concerns and areas, so that I am constantly thinking about that, in addition to thinking about the issues that I'm concerned about.
President Laurie, there was a part of your answer, just as you were speaking, we lost a little bit of it because the sound went out. So I think it was on probably your first step that we lost a little bit of it. If you could repeat just or summarize parts of it, because it was really compelling.
Sure. About an answer to this question.
Correct.
Yeah. I don't know who the person is that asked the question. Maybe we wouldn't be able to know because they came through a particular channel.
They came through the Zoom room.
Got it. Okay. But thank the person for the question, most importantly, because I think about this all the time. The first issue I would say that center right has been particularly powerful on has been freedom of expression, and particularly around questions of that as a fundamental right. And what I was saying was that both the right and the left have had a particular commitment to freedom of expression at different points in American history. And whenever I think about this, I don't think about an opposition between freedom of expression and inclusivity. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. And I get annoyed when, media or other folk create this opposition. I think we need to think about it as a right and a responsibility, that the right is to freedom of expression and freedom of academic inquiry. Those are two different things, but to both of those. And the responsibility is towards creating a more and more ever expanding inclusive circle so that we use that freedom of expression to make sure that all the stories are included. And that's part of our equity narratives project that I mentioned earlier. So that would be one example that I've been really compelled by my conversations with folks on the center right.
Thank you so much. We're coming to the time where we need to wrap this really compelling conversation up. But President Laurie, you're starting a new chapter in your professional life, and you're doing something new and something different. What is that?
I will be moving from Middlebury to become the president of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is a scholarly and research society that was started in 1780 by John Adams and John Hancock. And their idea was to gather the great minds of the new and scarily unstable republic in the worst year of the revolution, 1780. And their idea was to gather every art and science to enhance the honor and dignity of a free, independent, and virtuous people. And every time I say that mission statement, it always, gives me chills, because it feels like, even though if you look at some of the founders and what their concerns were and how they think about stuff, it feels either irrelevant or really hard because of their views of who belonged in our democracy and who didn't. Those words, as we continue to think about each of those words, freedom, dignity, honor, virtue, we need to talk and re-examine those in all of the ways that we need to in contemporary society, in a polarized world, in a world of climate change and so on. So it's both an honorary society. We just came from the induction weekend in Cambridge, Mass. This weekend, I got to meet my most favorite writer, Jhumpa Lahiri, who was inducted. Grant Hill, the great philanthropist and basketball player, was inducted. George Clooney was one of our inductees, but he didn't come because of his activism. Meaning he was inducted because of his commitment to the social good. And the values there are deliberative excellence, excellence in deliberative practices, commitment to the common good, bipartisan solutions, and honoring excellence in all walks of American life, in the arts and leadership and so on. So I'm super thrilled, but I want everyone at Bennington to know that I'm staying in Vermont 3 or 4 days a week, because Vermont is an incredible place to learn about democracy. I think it's one of the few places left in the country where there are real hopes, and that America frequently can recognize itself through the county and the local, sometimes even more than it can recognize itself through the state or the nation, in the sense that it works together across difference. But I just want to say how important Vermont has been in learning about democracy, and places like Bennington are incredible places to continue to refine and redefine what democracy is in the 21st century. So I hope that you will take that opportunity whenever you can. I've learned from Bennington about the role of arts in democracy, trying to get an initiative finished before I go, based on those ideas. And I really wish all of you well. I've been an admirer from afar for so many years, when I started to teach at Bard in the early 90s and onward. So I want to wish you congratulations, and don't be a stranger. I'm slow but doggedly reliable on non-urgent emails.
You can't see what's happening in the room here, but our students have been writing furiously, as have our faculty as you are speaking, and our trustees and our president are here, and they have been listening intently. You have given us rich food for thought around humanity, around leadership, around what it means to be in community together, and around what it means to really grapple with complex issues in a thoughtful, intentional way. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us tonight, and thank you so much for your thoughtfulness. Please join me in thanking President Laurie.
Thank you. I'll sign off now, and it's been an honor to be with you.
Thank you. And now I turn it over in the room here to Brian Campion. Brian.
Thank you so much, Maurice. Again, a terrific job hosting and interviewing. So everyone will recall every week we have been going to something we're calling From the Field, where we get a sense of how different communities throughout the United States are working on issues related to our democracy. We've spoken to folks in Georgia, DC, Texas, and tonight we have Farrellyn. Farrellyn, are you with us?
I am.
Great. Farrellyn, Sordif, and Deirdre Kevorkian, her sister, both are joining us from Greensboro, North Carolina, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about Democracy United. And I think the best way to kick this off is for the two of you just to give us a little background on the organization.
Okay. Well, it was really Deirdre's brainchild. We have both been sort of casually politically active for a while. Really got started being more serious about activism after the fall of Roe v. Wade and the midterm elections. Started really getting involved with the Guilford County Democratic Party here in Greensboro. But maybe I'll let you talk a little bit about how you got this off the ground.
So I was really concerned about what I was seeing, obviously, and I was looking around and I saw that there's a lot of great progressive organizations, but I noticed that they're all in silos. And so I thought, well, what happens if we bring them together? Now, just so you know, I'm just a concerned citizen. I'm a mother and a grandmother. I don't have any type of history in organizing or political movements. So this was all very new to me, but I'm so worried about our democracy that I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And so I got together with a lady from a group called Red, Wine, and Blue. It's a great organization, by the way. They do a lot with Zoom meetings and they educate people on the issues. And then there's another woman who's also local who knew a lot of people. So she really helped get this organization together. So I ended up having, and still do, have potlucks at my house once a month. And it was really cool when all these organizations came together around a dinner and they started talking about what they were all doing. And they'd said, well, I didn't know that you did that. I didn't know you did that. And then as a result of that, the walls have been coming down and they're all working together. And so I'm seeing that they're pairing off and doing projects together. And it's really, we've been going from strength to strength.
Yeah, and we started this, our first meeting, I believe, was in March, right?
It was.
Yeah, so, and let me just give you a quick rundown of the organizations under the Democracy United umbrella here in North Carolina. Red, Wine, and Blue was mentioned, Carolina Forward, Planned Parenthood, Next Gen America, Indivisible, Faith Action International, League of Women Voters, Lillian's List, NAACP Black Alliance, Voice for Choice, Sojourn Project 2, Now Era, and Guilford for All. And we also work closely with the Guilford County Democratic Party. So that's how we got rolling. And then, we can talk about this in a little bit, but we did come together as a group to put on a reproductive rights rally a couple of weeks ago, which went really well. So what else would you like to hear about?
No, this is great. So we do have a question from our Zoom audience. Folks are wondering, so you've brought people together, and what have been some of the opportunities of bringing people together? Have you sort of is it been a way to save money? Has it been a way to message better? What are some of the things that have come out of bringing everyone together like this?
Messaging. Our goal for organizing Democracy United was primarily to combat disinformation and also amplify the messages of these progressive organizations that we knew were trying to do the same thing. And there's obviously so many different issues that we're all trying to rally around. So those were the primary reasons that we got this started.
So some of the ways that we work together besides the potluck dinners is we have a thread, text thread, and we also have email. And so when we have issues that come up, then different members will put out on the text thread, this is an issue, this needs to be dealt with. And so we will then all comment and do some brainstorming. And a lot of times then if it's, we will need to amplify the message. Then instead of having just one organization that's sending out social media and emails, we now have 16 organizations that are, once again, we're amplifying the message. And so now we're all sending out the same message and so our reach is much greater.
Great. We have another question, and then if somebody from the audience has a question, please raise your hand. Can you give us an update on reproductive rights in North Carolina?
Well, it's very much under assault. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we have a 12-week ban, which has already taken lives of women in this state. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine who is running, Margie Benbow, she's running for the North Carolina House. A good friend of hers didn't realize she was pregnant, went to the hospital. By the time they realized that she had an ectopic pregnancy, she bled out and died. So, I mean, this isn't a game, but so the answer is, at this point, we have a 12-week ban, but if we have a bigger majority of Republicans that get into the office, they do have a bill that is ready to go, and it's called the Human Life Protection Act. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to prohibit abortion from the moment of conception, which means, of course, no IVF, no birth control, and no maternal health care.
Yeah, so that lit a fire under us too. We're trying to do everything we can to stop that from happening, of course.
Any questions from the audience? Yes, please, go ahead.
There's no audio.
Oh, sorry. I guess she does need the mic. I was being lazy, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nora. I'm a freshman at Bennington College. I've been wondering, what has it been like having conversations with your local community about autonomy when it comes to abortion, and how do you deal with conflict in a manner that's safe for you but productive for everyone around you and you?
Yeah, I mean, it is concerning. Our personal safety is concerning. When we held our rally in downtown Greensboro, it was in a public park. We had wonderful speakers. We had a Supreme Court justice and a senator and a doctor running to be a senator. And we hired security. We hired armed security just in case. And that's a strange thing to have to do, but you have to do it. And one thing that we have noted, I also launched an organization 2 years ago called Voice for Choice, and we had our own March Madness, and we raised $30,000 in 30 days for Carolina Abortion Fund and Planned Parenthood's PAC. And the big challenge in both of these organizations is getting younger people of reproductive age involved in the work that we're trying to do. And we've really tried hard to do that and have not been as successful as we'd like to be. And the same thing with women of color and men. We'd like to have more men involved. It's certainly, these restrictions in reproductive care certainly affect men as well as women. It's their partners and their sisters and their mothers. And so have I answered your question?
I think so. We're going to leave it there. Thank you both so much for joining us. And we know if students and others are interested, they can find your organization online.
Yeah, we're on Facebook. It's Democracy United NC. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads. We've got a lot of information that we're sharing there about voting, about reproductive care, and all the issues.
Great seeing you again. And Deirdre, great meeting you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, get my paper. So I'm Susan Scorbati. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of the Center for the Advancement of Public Action. And thank you all for coming. Is this on? Yeah, good. And for another really, I think, inspiring evening. I know I learned a lot tonight. So, and every week it's been, I think, really important, all the different topics that we've had, and the guests and the students and all of you who've participated. So we hope we're really making a difference. I think that's the most important thing, and also focusing on the students and your age group, and what we said from the very beginning of you all getting out and registering to vote, because you will literally make the difference in this election. So we're at the point every Thursday where we do our call to action, and we have some really interesting things tonight for our call to action. So if we can bring the screen up, we'll go over what we've already done the last couple weeks, because we build on it from week to week. So our first week was register to vote, and one of our Bennington students created myballot.info, which we got a report last week, over 100,000 visitors to the site to register. We're hoping that translates into actual people voting. So we know there's a difference even between registering and then making sure you really actually vote. So that's important, and I want to say that our online audience, I'm going to say a bit about, every week I hear from someone out in the country who has been online with us and is kind of reporting in, which has been actually really inspiring. So our second week was educate yourself about down ballot. It's just as important to be electing really wise people for our Senate and our House of Representatives, as well as your local school board, your mayor, your town selectmen. And so we're all being very intentional about really learning before we vote, that we know everybody on the ballot before we make those checks. Participation in civic education. We've had some great conversations about that, and I think President Laurie really gave us, really an interesting focus on the conflict transformation piece, which was a lot to think about. And now tonight, it's run for office or volunteer for a civic organization, which last week we heard from Needles in a Haystack, a group of older people in Georgia who started out giving suppers and then ended up having 2,200 people, I think he said, and were responsible for getting Osloff and Warnock elected in Georgia. So that was very inspiring. And like tonight, we heard from North Carolina. But I wanted to bring Will Greer. So Will, could you please come up? Very brief. Will's going to tell us that about his experience. So Will's recently graduated. Come on up here. I'm going to a student at Bennington, recent graduate, who decided to run for office and has won the primary for the Democratic Party and will be in the election in November. And we're very hopeful that he will probably be the youngest legislator in Vermont in the House. So Will's going to say a little bit about.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm glad to be here. So I was asked to talk a little bit about why I ran for office and kind of what encouraged my energy from such a young age. Yep. Would it be best for me to stand here, actually? Here. Oh, okay. I'll stand here. Okay. Cool. Yep. Yep. So I'm not going to get too much into my background, but I will address all that here very briefly. So when I think about where my political roots started, my grandmother, I'm from Texas originally, would take me to county government meetings, would take me to party meetings, probably from about the time I was about 6 years old. So I was always very involved with party building and just being a part of local government. I moved around as a child a lot and eventually lived in South Texas. So that's where I spent most of my childhood, a very deep blue pocket of Texas, very agricultural, very rural, and one of the few spots in the United States that is primarily Hispanic. So I lived in a county that was over 90% Latino at the time, and it still is, and it's growing faster than pretty much any part of the country. So when I tell people, the growth and the future of our country, it really is in South Texas. I mean, I live in Vermont now, but, I just throw that out there. But so I organized a lot in rural communities for various candidates and just different political issues, abortion being one of them. We've heard about that tonight. But what really spawned me to run for office was seeing, as a child, the lack of involvement that elected officials took in my life. And there were two people. Well, I'll just speak to one tonight because I know we're on a time crunch. But he was a Republican, and he was a state representative in Texas. And he always took time to come to our county meetings with the Democratic Party. And he would tell us what he wanted to know from us, what he couldn't do politically or just electorally, whatever his rationale was. But he was always very honest, and I always appreciated that. And I always said, one day when I feel ready to do it and run for office, I want to be like him. I want to be like Travis. And unfortunately, he got primaried this year by a far-right Republican and lost his seat. So there it goes, right? So I ran here. So I'll give you my backstory about how I got to Vermont. So I had always vacationed in Vermont as a child, and so it just felt very natural to want to come here and pursue education. But I told my mother, I said, I will not get involved in politics while I'm in Vermont. I will come back to Texas. That did not happen. But I graduated a year early, and I was just ready to get out into the world. So I was a lobbyist and an organizer for the Democratic Party and for an anti-tobacco campaign, an anti-drug campaign here in Vermont. So I did that for about 2 years, and then our local representative, Whitman, stepped down in May. So I did what any college student who's about to graduate does. I went to Africa for a conference, quit my job while I was in Africa, and then filed my paperwork once I got back to Vermont to run for his seat, because I realized that we needed someone young to keep that seat young, and just also to bring youth voices to politics here in Vermont, because we are an aging state. I think the youth are the future of Vermont, and we have a lot of problems facing us, and this biennium is going to be tough. I know a lot of people, including Brian Campion, I won't speak for why he's leaving, but I know a lot of people are leaving because of how stressful the situation is in Montpelier. And having been there, and seeing decisions, again, from people that lack involvement in their communities, despite Vermont being a state where we are very involved. Just hearing some of the rationale behind things really concerns me. And so I wanted to step up. And so at 21 years old, I hope I will win in November. And if I do have that honor, I look forward to serving our district, which is in Bennington. So it's the Bennington 2 district in the House. And it's pretty much all the northern and western part of town. So that includes the village of North Bennington, the village of Old Bennington, and pretty much everything west of Route 7. It's a really squiggly line that cuts right through town. But anyway, if you're in that district, please reach out to me. And for everyone that doesn't vote in Vermont, you're still in this district and your voice still matters. So if you have any questions or any concerns that you want to bring up, find a way to contact me. My email, my phone number's online, so it's pretty easy to reach me. But also reach out to your elected officials. And I'm going to, oh, it's not up here anymore. The number 2 that you guys did, research your down ballot races. That's so important. And they would love to hear from you because, they're accessible in most places. So do that if you can. I mean, we have a month till the election, so do your research and get it out there. But thank you all so much. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Will. Thank you, Will. So we have one more very short video tonight from, which was wonderful that this was sent in to us, from Audra Watson at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. They are having a youth civic solutions competition. They wanted to get that out to young people who are here and online, ages 14 to 24. And if we can have the Well, let's have the video, and then we'll go to the QR code where you can go to look this up, and I can give you the site as well. So this is
Afternoon. My name
Audra.
is Audra Watson. On behalf of the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, I'd like to invite you to join us in our Youth Civic Solutions competition. The competition is seeking your big, bold, creative ideas about how to improve our civic health. Submission entries should respond to one of three categories. The first category is how do we improve civic knowledge? The second category, how do we improve civic engagement? The third category, how do we improve trust in each other and trust in institutions? Submissions can take two forms, either a written entry of no more than 300 words or a video entry of up to 1 minute. We are looking forward to receiving your submissions. Please know the deadline is coming up soon. It's October 4th, and winners will be announced on October 22nd, 2 weeks ahead of the election. We also want you to know that winners will receive $1,000, and we hope to link them with a leader in the civic space who can help them to expand their network. We're looking forward to reviewing your submissions. Please let us know if you have questions. Information can be found on our website.
Great. Thank you, Audra. So can we bring the call to action slide up again? Great. So for students here or online, if you are interested, this is the QR code, and their website is citizensandscholars.org. So we encourage everyone to get involved. So I'm going to close tonight to share with you a woman who got in touch with me this week, who has been on one of our online participants, and she's canvassing in Philadelphia. And she asked me, first she just wrote to me, was excited about what she was doing, which was great. And I said, well, is it okay to share with our audience this week? And she said, absolutely, that would be great. So she's been working with two organizations. One's called Seed the Vote, which is a national organization that works with local movement organizations in 5 swing states and operates in their local communities. And I had not heard about them. So Seed the Vote, if you're interested in that. The second group she's been working with is called Unite Here, which is the union, I think one of the largest unions. I think it's national, but this is the Philadelphia section. And they are the, food service. I thought this was so interesting. These are the food service workers and hotel employees, a very large union in Philadelphia. She said she's meeting other volunteers from Eugene, Oregon, Minneapolis, and New Orleans. And they're all in Philadelphia, and they're working with this union. And the union is helping to pay for their logistics so that they provide housing and transportation for people who are arriving in from all over the United States that want to work with this union, right? Really interesting. And the quote that she said that really stuck with her from a canvasser, who was another canvasser who arrived from around the country, was, and I thought this was important to just end with, they said, it's all a game of planting a seed, trusting people that they know what's best for them and their community and their conditions. So I thought that was a great thing to end with today. So anyway, thank you. Next week we're focusing on the courts, rule of law, and democracy. We have 2 really dynamic legal scholars that I know you're going to be very excited to engage with. And so please now join us for coffee and tea and some cookies out in the lobby here. Okay, thank you.